Today on the Founder at 50 podcast, my guest is Ben Elowitz, co-founder of Blue Nile and Wet Paint, and now helps founders along their own journeys. Ben's experiences start in the very earliest days of e-commerce and then continue as he was pioneering content creation platforms in the early days of Web 2.0, which is where we met after both our startups were acquired by the same company. In this conversation, Ben opens up about the emotional cost of chasing success, the identity unraveling that can follow an exit, and how he now helps founders achieve alignment between business goals and inner clarity. My path with Ben also crossed as he was a power user of Nudge Mail, one of my earliest side hustles, and we share an obsession with productivity tools and hacks. If you're a builder wondering what comes after success or how to really dive in and enjoy the journey itself, Ben's story offers a roadmap worth hearing. Ben, you're here with me today. How great. It's so nice to see you.
Great to see you.
How's your week going?
It's been packed. I'm working on a bunch of different companies with different entrepreneurs, and it's kind of been never a dull moment. I got a little bit of time to myself this morning. Was grateful to catch up, but all good.
That's impressive. You're someone I know who you put everybody else's, all of your clients, all the people you work with, you put all of their needs so far ahead of so many of your own that I'm glad to hear you've taken some time for yourself.
Hey, why is it we take our responsibilities and commitments to other people more seriously than our commitments to ourselves? Like, why do we do that?
I don't know, probably the same reason we are kinder to our Starbucks barista than to our own family members.
Good one.
Probably in the same family of things.
I think
So
it's the social brain. The social brain's bigger than we give it.
I like that. I like that. Now, Ben, I've actually known you since both our startups were acquired by Vigil about roughly a decade ago. But what I want to do is before we talk about where our paths crossed, I want to go all the way back to where you started. So if you wouldn't mind, let's talk about those early 20s. Where'd you end up after school? Where'd you go to school? And what'd you start doing right away? And then we'll see where we take it.
Before and during college, I was a software nerd. When I was like, 13, 14, I worked at the time it was called MIS. That was the precursor to IT, doing data entry and was making 1099 wages as an independent contractor at a community hospital, then writing code for them. So that's like 13, 14 years old.
So you were an entrepreneur around the same time you had your bar mitzvah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone used the word entrepreneur yet. Like that didn't come till later. Yeah, I did that. And then during school, studied software engineering and worked at Microsoft and other software companies in summers. And when I graduated college, I was getting an electrical engineering, computer science, and math degrees from Berkeley. And
Is
when I
that
graduated
was that three
college,
degrees?
electrical engineering, computer science counts as one long degree.
Okay.
And then math is only 4 letters, so that's easy. And I was interviewing at all these software companies and had offers from all these software companies. And a good friend of mine had said, now's like a time in your life when you can either be walking through doors in a career you've already kind of tracked yourself into, or you can open new doors. And he convinced me to go interview at Bain in management consulting. And I was a fluke for them. They were a fluke for me. But that comment that my friend Andrew made, that you can either walk through doors or open new doors, had a lot of influence on me. And it made me say, okay, let me try this other thing. I don't really understand what management consulting is. It was incredibly vague and nebulous. But I said, what the heck, let's do it. And it shifted my perspective up tens of thousands of feet in altitude in the kinds of things that I was working on.
That's amazing. And it's such a profound kind of way of thinking to be able to receive at such a young age, right? Look, that's the kind of thing that a lot of people only hear or discover maybe in their 40s. So you sort of walk through life your entire career without the, I don't know, burden of thinking, I got to go get a job.
Well, that's totally true. And even back to those younger years when I was 13, 14 at the hospital, then I started doing consulting with an older consultant, like kind of like a friend's dad. And he was billing me out to clients like A&M Records and Kaiser Permanente. And I would build software and database systems for them. Now we're talking like 15, 16 years old. Working in summers, all of my friends in liberal arts in Berkeley, they were looking for like research internships or a job in retail. And I was working at Microsoft up in Seattle where they'd fly me up and rent me a car for the summer. And then,
Do you think, Ben, that you were just sort of wired a little different to see that? Or we're hearing comments like that and just place, time, and timing of like the evolution of tech arc where you fell into it? Could anyone follow that footstep? Because I don't think so. I don't think we're all built the same.
I think if I go back and say, like, why did that happen? Really, what was going on? The way I grew up, work became this avenue where I could feel super successful. I didn't have the best social skills. I didn't have the most stable family environment. But when I would sit down and write code, when I would sit down and work on a project and I was independent, dude, I felt great doing it. And so it kind of channeled me into this area of tech, not because it was tech, but because you could be independent and create things independently. And I think that's probably the thread that's like at a deeper level of I wanted that autonomy and independence. And so I happened to like make choices that really got me into autonomy and independence and never, always being in a place where I knew what I was doing could be valued.
Before, no, I haven't spent this much time at the early stage with anybody. I want to stay here for a second. I want to bring the very present into your past. What age, if you were 13 when you were starting to code, 15 when you were building systems, 21 coming out of school and working at Bain, which of those ages would you have been best suited for today's world with vibe coding and apps like Cursor and Lovable and Replit? Which version of Ben would have been the biggest beast on those systems?
Man, I love that. That's fun. There's a teeter totter. I go one way and I get one advantage, and I go the other way, I get a different advantage. But if you go back to 21, 19 to 21, where I was a really smart kid, felt unstoppable at the keyboard, um, and felt like I can, as long as I have the time to go down any trail I want to and create anything. We created graphic and font editors in 8088 assembly language
Wow.
because BASIC and Pascal were too slow on a DOS machine. Like that kind of unbounded creativity and the sense of ample time was awesome. And so I think that that's an attribute that I think is so important in the vibe coding age. Is like, do you have that interest in exploration and the range to go anywhere? And I did actually. But on the other hand, I didn't have any judgment. And so I didn't know what was good or bad or important or why. And so I think that's the other side of the teeter totter is that there's probably a magic place in between, probably about the age I was at when we started Blue Nile, where I had the creativity and some of the judgment to bridle the creativity. What
Okay.
do you think? What would you say to that?
Well, I can picture high school me. Well, I can picture middle. I was in Canada, so our grade system was slightly different. I could picture sort of fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grade me would who was like writing code on paper during other classes and going home to my computer and typing in the code I had prepped. Like that me would have been a bit of a demon on some of these things. I also think I also like late 20s me on them a lot, but I can't even imagine what I'd be doing with those tools then. We should, by the way, all I want to do right now is go off into Lovable or Replit and ask it to recreate Turbo Pascal by Borland.
Oh my God, that would be awesome.
All right. So you're now in your early 20s, you're at Bain. Can you get me up to like mid 20s? How long did you stay there?
I stayed at Bain about 2.5 years, which was like long enough to crest the first level of professional consultant at Bain. Had worked mostly on tech clients there, but working at the business and capital levels, like for a telecom company that had $9 billion at the time to spend, which of their business units should get how many billions? Or not in the tech work domain, but the company was in the tech and telecom business. I left when one of my best mentors, actually, Gus Ty, went and became a venture capitalist and started introducing me to companies, some of the first companies he was funding. And it was 1996 when I left, and it was the very beginning of the e-commerce wave. And
Yeah.
he funded a company in a category that we thought could go pretty far in e-commerce. And I joined 3 days after the Series A funded as the third person hired by the company.
And that company was?
That company was fatbrain.com. I like to joke that it was the number two best outcome in the books category of e-commerce after Amazon. We did take the company public 2 years later, which is amazing, right? To take a company public in 2 years.
Yeah.
And
And
then it
what was
got
the
bought by
role?
Barnes& and Noble. I started off as the third person hired. The role was everything. The deal was I would spend a third of my time on technical stuff and two-thirds on business stuff. So I built the entire analytics system that was like tracking web referrers before you had any kind of Google Analytics or any tools.
You were taking the Apache server logs and calculating your hits, clicks, and page views, I assume?
Dude, Apache was not on the scene yet.
No, oh, pre-Apache. Wow, okay.
This was, well, we were using, the choices were Netscape or Microsoft IIS. We were using IIS. But yeah, literally compiling all those into SQL databases and counting out visitors, and then even giving credit to partners who would refer visitors to us. We built the second associates program in the category, like the Amazon
Wow.
Associates program that fueled their success. So that was the technical side. And then the business side was really building a number of different business lines for them, from that associates program to business development, and working really tightly with another mentor who became the president of the company to build the sales function out for him and kind of have a direct sales arm for an e-commerce company.
So you've come out of the gate running. I mean, maybe even flying, depending on who you might talk to. And so what I'd love to know is, at that time, were you thinking long into the future at all? Were you looking at the road ahead? Were you looking 10, 20 years ahead? When I'm 50 or 40 or whatever, or one day I want this title, this job? Or were you just enjoying and rolling as it went?
I'd say I didn't have that kind of intentionality of knowing what the whole arc would look like. But when I left Fat Brain to start Blue Nile, I totally remember this moment where I was looking down the road at the arc and saying, okay, I had three different opportunities in front of me. One of them was to join another startup. One of them was to join with a friend who was founding a startup in the music space. And one of them was to go start Blue Nile with my co-founder. And I remember putting probabilities of success on each of them.
Okay.
And one of them was like a 1% chance, but boy, it would be incredible. One of them, the music one, was like a 5% chance, but it would probably be beat up by the recording industry. Like Napster was, about to be beat up by the recording industry. And the third was Blue Nile. And I was like, I think this has a 30% chance of working. And if it does, that's going to be, I mean, I had been really lucky to be in a company that had had an IPO already. It's like, if I can do that again, holy cow. And Jeremy, I was like a second generation e-commerce founder at this point. Like
Right.
there weren't second, there were like practically zero of those out there. So we had this big advantage that I had that experience and judgment, so to speak. Not for real. I was still 26 and 27 years old, but at least I had done it before in some way, shape, or fashion, and had some blueprint and lessons learned from it. So in that sense, I was like, I can do this again. And actually, who knows where it'll go for longitude, but it's certainly a really good trajectory to be on.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and smart realization. The only other person that I can think of that even comes to mind with is similar is, and I don't remember his last name, named Andrew. He was the founder of TicketWeb and Ticketfly. And then I think he did a third and maybe even a fourth version of the same thing and kept getting bought by Ticketmaster. But it was like, this guy knows more about this than anybody, back also in like the early 2000s, late 90s. When I'm curious, did you have a rubric for that 30%, or was that just you rolled some dice? Did you put some serious, how nerdy did you get on that?
I would say the probability is like notional, but I had enough of a template from having done an e-commerce company to understand what's different here and what's the same. At Fatbrain, we were shipping books that weighed pounds, textbooks and computer science books and hardcore engineering books for $40 a package, and they weighed a couple pounds. And
Right.
at Blue Nile, we were talking about shipping, $7,000, $12,000 diamonds that weighed a 20, a fraction of an ounce. And so looking at what was killing e-commerce at the time was the price to weight ratio. It's like, oh, wow, I'm stepping into something that has fundamentally different economics, right? Same thing on the economics of a customer to acquire them. What's the lifetime value of a customer look like? Same thing on supply relationships. I'd been, even in the first couple of years, we knew pretty quickly we were duking it out against Amazon. And to walk into an industry where there is no major competitor and you can have a supply advantage, for example, like we couldn't build a supply advantage for product against Amazon. So I had enough of these mappings to know, okay, within the e-commerce company, I've got kind of a framework. This has a lot of the things that weren't there in my last company that I can see I'm correcting for. So at least I knew that.
Got it. I'd love for you to do a quick, what was the elevator pitch, if you could, the short version. And then As you were founding it, what you thought was the journey? Did you think 6 months an IPO, 10 years, I'm just going to build biz? What did you think and hope for setting out into that?
Yeah. So when we started Blue Nile, the narrative started with the consumer, which was buying diamonds is an incredibly nebulous experience for the male consumer. It's one of the most important and high stress purchases of their life. And they go into a jeweler and the jeweler says, well, which stone speaks to you? And creates an environment of distrust because the pricing was all high, all artificially high markup. And then, well, let me give you a deal on it,
Mm.
and created tremendous insecurity. We worked with Carter Cast, who's one of my all-time heroes. Well, I call him my tallest pedestal award. He's amazing. And he really built a whole brand around that and taught me to do that. And that was kind of the pitch, was to say, if you can become a trusted partner to a consumer in an otherwise nebulous purchase experience, wow, you have the chance to redefine an industry and really own and earn a consumer purchasing sight unseen. The big question was, yeah, but will anyone buy one of these things without seeing and touching it? And that was what we knew we had to overcome. And we went through a super disciplined process in order to do that.
And what year was that?
98,
99.
99 was when we started.
And again, for those who are unfamiliar with the time, this is when companies like Ben's were convincing people that it's okay to just use a credit card online, right?
We had to have people, we had an 800 number. Many people chose to call in and read their credit card number to an agent over the phone for trust, right? That was back in that time. And so we went through that. We had it took a couple months for us to create our own shopping cart. There was no Spotify, or excuse me, there was no Shopify at the time that you could
Neither.
leverage. You had to create everything yourself.
So what did you, again, I want to focus for a moment on what were your expectations, right? What did you
Yeah.
think when you got the thing started, but before you had actually manifested any of it? So you've raised the first amount of capital, or you've got the first build working, some early stage. What was in your head as what the road ahead looked like?
Gosh, it was just a small number of months in succession. And the VCs were really excited to fund us for our first few rounds. And in that time, I would say I was purely focused on execution. Like, there was so much to do. Everybody was chief cook and bottle washer. We were around, if I remember right, around $100 million of revenue within 2 years, $100 million annualized revenue within 2 years. And it was,
If you're touching on that, if it's not proprietary information, I'm guessing it's not. How long between the site launching and the first sale?
well, we had a super neat hack. And this is actually for other entrepreneurs starting companies. This is something I use over and over again and kind of look for. We had a hack, and I like to say it's like we didn't start from zero. We started by moving at 60 miles an hour. And the way we found the Blue Nile opportunity was when my co-founder was searching for a diamond ring and found purveyors online.
Okay.
There was a guy named Doug Williams, awesome dude, who was setting up some websites in Microsoft Front Page on his laptop in his little off-street jewelry showroom, creating tables with little TR and TD tags in his
Love it.
tables in Front Page, listing diamonds for sale. And he was already selling a couple a day.
Oh, wow.
And we bought his company the day. Now, he didn't have a shopping cart, but he did have people calling a couple times a day to say, I'm ready to purchase. We bought his company, and from our very first round, our Series A round, we had his run rate revenues that we were already servicing, and his websites that he had painstakingly created and listed in Yahoo. And it was like we started from the traffic light already moving at 60 miles an hour, whereas everybody else was starting at zero. We had supply relationships, we had web traffic from Yahoo, we had credibility, we had the ability to, and the inventory to actually have product. All of those things gave us a huge advantage. So when we launched our shopping cart finally, however many months later, yeah, it took probably only a few days before somebody put something in a shopping cart and bought it. But the business had already been selling literally millions of dollars of inventory before that.
That's an amazing hack. I love it. Do you think it's replicable? Does it take a special set of ingredients?
There's lots of different kind of analogies to it that depend on the business. So in an enterprise business, it might be starting with a couple customers that you've done customer development with
Sure.
before you ever write code.
Yeah. Research pilots, design studies, etc. Love
There
that.
was a period when SEO ran the world, and it was don't start your own fresh domain and have to build search cred from zero. Instead, go acquire a domain. So it's something around whether it's supply or tech or whatever else, any chance you can to accelerate a business is a really, really, really helpful thing. But the first, otherwise, getting off the zero line just it burns so much energy. Think of how much fuel it uses for a rocket to break through the atmosphere.
Yeah, I talk about booster rockets all the time. When we got this company off the ground, we did a hackathon. I remember we talked about this. We had this movie doll product, which luckily went a little viral on TikTok and also was sending hundreds of thousands of players a day, which let us build it and then monetize it and then sell it and fund the core company. So love
See,
this
you
kind of
did it. This is
thinking.
what you did. It's perfect.
Did a little bit of it. If anything, we often think like, what if we had taken different? What if we had kept it? We couldn't really afford to, but it was a really interesting moment. I love that kind of hack. If you've never heard the story, for anyone listening, of how Airbnb funded itself, go Google that. It's really well publicized. We're not going to take time for it here. So now take me to the end of your journey with Blue Nile, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So, like I said, I did not have any expectations around exit. Boy, it's a good thing in the sense because the capital markets changed, the environment changed when the dot coms busted in
Right.
2000, 2001. We literally had the prospectus for the IPO written and ready to take out when the window closed for
Wow.
IPOs. We were kind of ready to file, and that IPO got called off, and the company had a real hard time trying to figure out, okay, who will finance it. All those investors who were throwing money at the category before suddenly weren't interested in e-commerce. Downsized the company. I stepped out of the company. And really focused the company on just like how do we get to profitability with as little necessary cash as possible. And it was hard. It's hard to leave. It's hard to leave these things, especially if they keep going. Though I felt like the work I had done was super, super enduring. And by the way, still super close to a number of people involved who have become like my permanent family. But at the same time, to like step away is tough, man.
Well, when I met you at Vigil and we had sort of started comparing notes, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait, you're the Blue Nile guy. Because while I did end up buying my engagement ring at a local jeweler, I had used all of the art. I learned everything I needed to know. So you were this unknown little mini hero for me.
Yeah, and I ran site and product and all that stuff at Blue Nile, and stories like that are my second favorite outcome for a customer experience. Like, it's not quite as good as them buying, but I looked at it as, and we looked at it as a team, is we still want to empower people. And if they're walking into their jewelry store with our print, literally printing pages from our site and making their final purchase, and they've used us an average, if I remember right, there was like 30 some visits to the website before a purchase would get made at the time. And if they're using us that intensively, word's going to spread really well. And so my second favorite outcome was somebody who did all the research and didn't make the purchase, but they might still be an evangelist.
I'm a big believer in that kind of thinking as well. I think the putting that goodness out there and being a resource and being trustable spreads, right? It just does. Like if I want to know good outdoor gear, I mean, beyond Wirecutter, I can just go to Huckberry, which I one of my favorite newsletters, and I know everything they're going to sell that'll be good. I may buy it, I may not. I might pull it up if I'm in an REI and I'm looking to find something, but I'm inevitably buying stuff there, and it inevitably pays itself forward. So I'd love to hear how you went from that moment into where we met after you sold wet paint. What was a bit about that journey?
Yeah, so I had a little bit of a low after Blue Nile where I realized the times had changed, capital markets were lousy. It's not like people were calling, placing ads in Craigslist saying I'm looking for a co-founder. It was like things really shut down in 2001. And the most inspiring kind of learning that I had done at Blue Nile was from Carter Cast, who I mentioned before, world class person, world class human being, incredible mentor in marketing and consumer brand. And he just had a way of being with people where he would really invest in people and like me. And I am so grateful to him. And I thought, okay, I need to go get like a credential and have like a function that I'm really good at instead of just being somebody who can kind of like you were talking about with vibe coding, you can sit down and kind of do anything you want, but that doesn't mean you're going to be an expert. And so I worked for a couple of years at a company called Precor that was doing a turnaround in the fitness equipment world. I was working with hard goods, doing manufacturing, and actually learning what consumer marketing was from bottom to top and complete responsibility. So I took those couple of years. Before then, I started Wet Paint. And in 2005, started Wet Paint. Wet Paint was a social media company inspired by Wikipedia. And at the time, Wikipedia would have been valued in the billions if it was a commercial enterprise,
Okay.
but it was nonprofit. And we thought, well, wait a minute, why should there just be one site that gathers information? This was, as you can kind of tell from the story, like this was the beginning of the golden age of user generated content.
Right.
And we said, let's build a platform where people can create whatever content they're looking for with a community. And that's how we started Wet Paint.
And what's the wet paint that got acquired 9 years later?
Yeah, a couple tours of duty in there.
Yeah.
We built that first version, the very social side of content creation. We succeeded in what we knew was the objective number one, which was make it easy for people to create content together with the community, and had tens of millions of traffic, of uniques of traffic. What we didn't kind of catch as we were starting it, but eventually became really aware of, is that you're also really dependent on advertising as a model. And in the meantime, this explosion of user generated content meant that advertisers had plenty of options and weren't going to pay a premium in order to put their advertisements on a user generated content page. So we rebooted the company, went to professionally authored content, went after the TV and entertainment category of news and community and information, built up a top 10 site in that category,
Okay.
still built up another big audience in the tens of millions. And that was what ultimately, when we were acquired by Vigil, they were able to incorporate.
Got it. And your role throughout that, were you CEO?
I would say like I evolved a lot at the beginning. I felt like I was responsible for everything.
Yeah.
Probably sounds familiar.
Yeah.
And again, with like Rob Grady, who taught me a ton, hired him in as our COO, and he ended up being a great mentor to me. Kind of started to learn to let go of things and got a lot more sophisticated about management. And so the last couple of years, I was focused on the strategic and business development and M&A and sales landscape, where you really had to do founder-led activities, and had such a talented group of people, that really a high talent bar, a high quality group of folks that were doing pretty much everything. And so it's really interesting how the roles change. I think the CEO job changes every 6 to 12 months anyway in a tech startup. But for me, it was also part of that, like kind of the maturity piece of learning how to uh, still have those details matter, but give notes better and better as I got older at the higher level, instead of wanting to adjust every single little thing.
Um, Neither of us lasted all that long. And I think, for a sort of disclaimer, Vigil was a very eclectic type of company. We were funded by a billionaire who made decisions on a whim and ended up passing away. And, a lot of strange things occurred. Strange things were afoot at the Circle K kind of moment. But today, the Ben I know, while you're obviously still the same person, you do vastly different things than when our paths first crossed professionally.
Yeah.
What inspired that change, and how'd you go about it?
What's really interesting to me is having worked in a few of these different environments, including Vigil, which was like ultra chaotic, and Blue Nile, where we were super disciplined, and Bain, which was like very structured in communication and execution, and very tightly organized in a really specific monoculture. Bain, we'd sometimes jokingly refer to people who work there as Bain cogs. And I had people who were mentoring me to be less creative so I could be more of a Bain cog, we said at the time. I hope that's okay for Bain's. Nobody minds me having said that. Uh, that difference in environments, Jeremy, I think I hadn't reflected on this, but I think having seen the extremes of it, it really gave me a chance to kind of hone in on what good looks like and what good doesn't look like, and see the contrast. And I think I'm really lucky because I got to see what good looks like in a bunch of those. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs who have never been in a really strong management culture where they actually knew what excellence in a particular function was, or how to lead a company. And it is a lot harder if you don't know that. I think I got to see the contrast between those two. And what I've ended up doing now, there are a handful of things I was exceptionally good at through continuous improvement and had great mentorship at, like fundraising and managing a board, managing a team, leading. And I get to work on just those things now with other entrepreneurs and kind of help pay forward the chance of like, okay, here's what good can look like. Let's go figure that out together and help you achieve your version.
So let's double click on that a little bit. We all hear the phrase that you can't scale taste, right? I also think that which comes into what's good and what's not. I also am of the belief that if I hadn't worked for some of the people I'd worked for who would push me in one direction or open my eyes to another thing, how much do you think that being able to be good to great comes from that exposure versus purely within?
I think if you don't have a map, you're not going to be able to navigate. So if you haven't seen what it looks like, lived what it looks like, or have someone else guide you to it, good luck finding it just by poking around in the dark. I think what you need is the magic combination of a real strong drive. In my case, it's a drive for continuous improvement. I like to joke that if you take away continuous improvement and anxiety from me, I'm just a pile of dried bones.
Just flesh and bones.
There's nothing left. But I think you need that drive, and you've got to have some kind of a map to know what it looks like. There's probably a few people who can do it instinctively. There's probably a few people who do it in a totally different way. But I think for most people, having some judgment of what good looks like is going to come from having seen what good looks like in like a really strong performing culture. Now, it doesn't mean you have to have seen it everywhere. I have a team I work with where they've got that drive in them. And when we go do novel things, it's not like they had to have seen those novel things being done before, but instead they just have a like, well, here's how we would approach that. And they do it really thoughtfully and really efficiently at the same time to say, like, we want a breakthrough result. We're going to have to do something different. And to do that, we're going to have to push ourselves.
So I love that thinking. If you were to be, if your audience right now is, 20 somethings who have never had the chance to experience something good to great, do you have advice for them? How can they have agency about that?
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought of this until you asked. So I love it. Wow. I guess those couple years I spent at Bain were really valuable to me. And there is something like if you have your choice of any great initial conditions to build a career in entrepreneurship, I can't think of anything better than having spent a couple years in what, as long as it turns out to be one of the top best organized, best executing companies, right? Like if you could be in the first couple years of a Google or the first couple years of a Dropbox or the first couple years of a PayPal, I don't know what it was like to be in those companies, but like you do see how people come out of those having seen examples of what good looks like and taking it into other businesses. So I think it's having a nose that those first opportunities, you're not just looking at the question of like, well, is it going to be a great experience or is it going to be a great outcome? But also like, where's the bar here? And if the bar's really high, that's probably a really, really, really good sign. And if the bar's low, you can tell in your interviews sometimes, right? If the bar's low, that might not be as good of a sign of like, okay, what am I really going to be able to take from this to help me? Okay, I'm curious, what do you think on that?
I think you're absolutely right. If you don't know what amazing is, I don't think you ever really know what great is. You can figure out good to great. I think, an example would be anything that seems subjective, right? So scotch and wine would be at one end of the spectrum, right? I can go open my first bottle of wine ever and drink it. And if I like it, well, it's good. That was that, right? And if I only buy wine on my own choosing and I never even look at like recommended at the store or on the website or wherever, then, who knows? I might actually have the best wine palate in the world or the absolute worst, right? And I think there's a balance, and that's obviously in an area where there's more about like, what do you like and what don't you like? When you're introduced to something that is sort of a whole nother tier, like, I don't know if they still do $2 chuck or not, but you remember $2 chuck? It was
Oh,
$2
totally.
Trader Joe's wine. I'm sure there's still an equivalent. It was fine. And you could have a great dinner party with a lot of $2 chuck. But if you had ever been brought to one of the better places in Napa or France or wherever and had $100 bottle of wine, there's a difference, right? I don't know how to perfectly recreate that in work, but one of the things I do say, and it's sort of something the way I think about what we're doing, is making sure that if you're the leader of the org or the leader of the product or wherever you are, that the bar is almost always out of reach, right? There's always more that Augie could do than it does. It could always do it a little better. And I try very hard to maintain with my team, well, we could do it this way. This would, like, what if we took the user through it this, whatever, doesn't really matter, versus, yeah, that's fine. Have you ever seen Whiplash, by the way, the movie Whiplash?
No.
There's a wonderful comment in there from J.K. Simmons about the I think I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's the two most damaging words in the English language are good enough. That's good enough
Yeah.
because
I
it
think like
discourages you from going to great.
I think there's probably lots of ways to do this, but lots of different formulas. But I think if I think about what's I've seen the most and what I enjoy the most, it's high standards with with positivity. So it's not like crushing high standards that churn through people's, emotional well-being, but it's like high standards with positivity, encouragement, and kind of a, hey, let's see what we can figure out together. And when you have that, it is really magical. And I'm like thinking of different people and companies I've worked with where you just see them gelling. So it's pretty cool.
So I want to. We're at this stage now. Tell everybody briefly what it is that you do now, and I'd like to know how you actually started doing it and why.
Yeah. So these days I work with a handful of companies and I'm somewhere between a consigliere and a rabbi and a consultant and a advisor and a coach, all these different kind of words. And I don't really have a perspective on what one's the best.
I
But I
call
work
you I call you the VC whisperer, by the way.
there you go. Yeah, I work really closely with CEOs and CEOs of startup companies. Entrepreneurs are always looking ahead of them and seeing the 180 degrees in front of them. And I think there's a talent that I got to be really good with, which is at the same time as looking at that 180 degrees ahead of time, also looking at the other 180 degrees facing the other direction the way an investor does. And the investors are assessing things from without, not within. And they're assessing things relative to what they see as the next capital milestones, not the next business milestones. And they're assessing them relative to a portfolio, not in singularity. And so you have these contrasts, and I think I'm very lucky to be able to hold the multiple truths in my head at the same time and kind of work as a partner to CEOs. I feel like CEOs in a way are movie directors. And when they go out to raise the money for a round, it's like they're pitching the reel for a new concept. And the movie directors are the Martin Scorseses, and then they meet the movie critics, the Leonard Maltins and the Siskel's and Eberts. And the VCs are the movie critics. They don't know how to hold a camera. They don't know how to set up a shot. And what you're really looking for in the capital journey is how do I design for capital in a way where I'm actually building the business I want, making the movie I want. The critics who I'm dependent on are going to love it. And so I would say like my fun thing that have gotten to be very good at is bridging the gap between those two. What does that actually mean? It means I work with a handful of companies, usually on things related to their capital trajectory of like, okay, what are we going to do with this company? What do you really want to achieve for you, for the company? How do we make that happen? Knowing there's these big external dependencies on customers and capital and working through really hard problems with that kind of 360-degree view of like, let's be both incredibly high in our standards of what we want and optimistic and positive about it while also kind of recognizing the constraints and kind of let's see what we can figure out together.
Well, you pull that off as if you're maestro and you've been playing the violin for centuries. I know that anytime we talk, I mean, for people to know, when I can have a casual call into Ben and we'll talk work for just a couple of minutes, and he'll always ask a question in a way that, first of all, is with nothing but kindness and positivity to your word, but also probing in a way that just sort of leaves me getting off the phone like, yeah, I got to think about that one. I don't think I've got that as well baked as I could. And it's such an amazing gift you have. Why did you start this? Was it again accidental success? You just had a client? Like, was this a deliberate path? What happened? How did you get to this?
It started itself. over the course of decades when people would say, "Oh, Ben, you're pretty good at this. Will you give me some advice about this?" And so entrepreneurs friends would ask me for advice. VCs would say, "Hey, will you go help so and so?" And by the way, Jeremy, it turns out I like helping other people more than doing my own work. Other people's problems are so interesting, right? Because you have healthy distance on them. And so I probably just felt the most alive when I did that. And a couple of years ago, one of my best mentors and I said, "What if we did that full time and like made it a practice?" And it's been incredibly, incredibly joyful because we're doing things that was we turned a hobby and a productive, helpful hobby into something that's like a real service and makes a difference in companies' trajectories. This is fun. We could do this all day. Thanks for making it fun.
If anyone needs to reach you and could use your service, where should they go?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn is probably what I would say.
All right. And if you can't find Ben, find me and I'll hook you up with Ben.
Totally.
So one of the questions I always like asking is if this Ben could go back in time and you could pick any of the versions of you and slip a little note, give a little advice, but it can't be like buy Apple when it's 6 or move to the resorts when 2019 rolls around. And it's also not going to have any sliding doors consequences. So it doesn't mean poof, now you're working in McDonald's or something. It's just more a way of changing thinking, a way of possibly growing yourself up a little. What would be a tip you wish you could give your younger self?
I would say kind of gelling around a couple of ideas. So for me, that sense of continuous improvement is kind of my most deeply held value. And it definitely relates to a place of insecurity of like, oh, I'm not good at that. And I don't like being incompetent at things. So it kind of gives me the discomfort that's kind of motivating. On the compassionate side, if I could kind of whisper one thing to myself, it would be to really embrace that insecurity and accept it. I don't know if that's possible, but I've gotten very good at it now where I realize, oh, I'm being insecure. Oh, that makes me anxious. And I've made friends with my anxiety today. But I think for me and anybody who's wired like me, that insecurity and anxiety can be so positively motivating, and understanding the value and the worth of it is awesome. I walked into every role I've had, including every conversation I have with you, Jeremy, and with everybody else I know, saying, yeah, what can I learn here? What can we figure out together? I've probably said, what can we figure out together like 5 or 6 times in this conversation. And there's a ton of acceptance of like, I don't have all the answers. I might know some things. I'll tell you what I do know. But accepting that insecurity and embracing it to say, let's see what we can figure out together, I think is what I did okay and could have done even better. And it's been the most rewarding thing to make sure that I was really just learning and growing a ton from everything I've done. And my friends who knew me in my 20s are like, you're a totally different person. Thank goodness. Because of that acceptance of that anxiety and all those insecurities. Like they're now my friends. I like those anxieties. I'm really comfortable with them.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's a real personal part of your journey. Now, we have one other way our paths crossed, which is you happen to use a product I had built, which is Nudge Mail, and most recently helped me find it a better home for itself because it had always been sort of the stepchild of the stepchild, or I don't even know where it had lived, though it was something I obviously had a lot of passion for. And one of the things you and I often sort of go back and forth on is like what are the tools or products or apps or hacks that we're using? I'm curious in this AI first era, is there anything that you're just utterly addicted to?
Right now, I'm playing with granola a lot and using it
What's
in
that? I'm
creative
not familiar
ways.
with it.
Granola is another meeting. It's a meeting mate. It sits in your meetings and takes notes for you.
Oh,
I
okay.
actually don't use the notes that it creates, but I look for things across meetings that I wouldn't be able to remember and track that are kind of themes across meetings. So, for example, if I have 3 or 4 coaching sessions with different entrepreneurs over the course of a week, I might say, hey, what are some of the principles that have come out of this that might be good for me to start thinking about putting into my next tool that I'm building? I build a lot of tools for entrepreneurs while we call them cheat sheets. And I'll start coalescing those. And so I think that's one fun one is going beyond the meeting notes to say like, hey, how do I let you span a bunch of different events to call out the things that are kind of most impressive? So I'd say probably that's one that I'm doing a lot of right now.
I like that. I'll go check that one out too. I'm always looking for cool things to use. So Last question for you, Ben. And seems like your journey has pieced together this just, I mean, you're just such a, I mean, if anyone uses any word other than mensch for you, I don't know what it would be. How do you define success today? And why do you do what you're doing? You could probably do a billion things. Why is this the thing?
I would say for me right now, what I'm really oriented towards, I feel like along the way of the different things I've been involved with, I've gotten to learn so much, but there's also been so much challenge. And I would hate for that to not go much further. We've talked a lot in this conversation about mentors and the people who had influence on us.
Yeah.
And some of those people had influence on dozens and dozens of people. I think of Gus Ty at Trinity Ventures, who has this incredible ripple effect on all the entrepreneurs that he's gotten to invest in.
By the way, I met Gus at my last start when I was doing Digit. I had pitched Gus, and he left me with such a strong impression. Did well, by the way, did invest in me, and I still have nothing but positive feelings. I've connected with him a couple times since then. So you're totally right.
So I think those interactions that like a lot of us don't even know the impact we have on others, right? But it turns out to be really big. And I think my working kind of bet is that some of the things that I've learned and earned in a very challenging way that were not easy to pick up, if those can pay benefits in a handful of companies that actually enhance the leaders' lives, help the companies be more successful, and then more importantly, kind of my Trojan horse secret motive is, wouldn't it be cool if there are generations of leaders who are actually better and more human and more compassionate and more successful and more skillful? And I had something to do with that. And I love the idea that I could have something to do with that. And there can be those ripples that some of the companies and entrepreneurs I might get involved with will pass other things on that can affect and build new organizations that make families successful, ultimately create wealth and value and impact in people's lives. So it's kind of a big holistic piece, but I think it's all in that ripple. If there are two words, I would say it's ripple effect.
Ben, that was such a wonderful and human thing to share. And I don't want to go anywhere from there, but thank you for sharing your journeys with us. What a ride you've had. And I'm so glad that you're in my world and there to bring positivity to me. And hopefully I'm helping create some of those ripple effects that you're trying to put out in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks for making it such a fun conversation.
Take care.